In the vast, sun-scorched plains of Montana, where the wind whispered secrets through the tall grass and the sky stretched endlessly like a promise unkept, rancher Elias Thorne rode his old bay horse along the fence line. It was a routine patrol, checking for breaches where coyotes might slip through, but that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in fiery oranges, he heard a sound that chilled his blood, a faint, ragged whisper carried on the breeze. "Just kill me fast," it said, weak and broken, like a prayer from the edge of oblivion. Elias reined in his horse, his heart pounding. He dismounted, boots crunching on the dry earth, and followed the voice to a clump of sagebrush near the creek bed. There, huddled in the shadows, was a figure wrapped in a tattered blanket, barely moving. Elias approached cautiously, his calloused hands trembling slightly. He'd seen his share of hardships on this land, droughts that stole livelihoods, blizzards that buried dreams. But nothing prepared him for this. The figure stirred, and the voice came again, hoarse and desperate. "Please, just kill me fast. You can't. You can't go on." It was a woman, her face hidden beneath the folds of the blanket, her body curled into a fetal position as if trying to disappear into the ground. Elias knelt beside her, his voice gentle despite the knot of fear in his gut. "Ma'am, I'm not here to hurt you. My name is Elias. But's yours." She didn't respond at first, only clutched the blanket tighter, her breath shallow and labored. With a deep breath, Elias reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the fabric. "I need to see it you're hurt," he said softly. She didn't resist, too weak to fight. As he peeled back the blanket, the world seemed to tilt. He stumbled back in horror, landing hard on the dirt, his eyes wide with shock. There, nestled against her emaciated frame, wasn't just a woman, but a tiny infant, no more than a few days old, its skin pale and mottled, eyes barely fluttering. The baby was wrapped in the remnants of the blanket, but what horrified Elias most were the bruises marring the woman's arms and neck, the deep gashes on her legs, and the way the child clung to her with frail, desperate fingers. She had clearly been through hell, beaten, starved, and now, on the brink of death with a newborn in tow. The woman's name was Maria, as she whispered later that night in Elias's modest ranch house. He had carried her and the baby inside, his strong arms gentle as he laid them on the worn couch by the fireplace. His wife, Clara, long gone from cancer 5 years prior, had left behind a home filled with echoes of warmth, and Elias drew on that memory now. He fetched clean water, bandages, and what little milk he had from the fridge, warming it carefully. Maria's story unraveled in fragments as he tended to her wounds. She was from a small town in Texas, fleeing an abusive husband who had promised love but delivered only pain. Pregnant and terrified, she'd hitched rides north, hiding in truck stops and ditches, until labor came unexpectedly by the roadside 2 days ago. The baby, a girl she named Hope in a moment of fleeting optimism, was born under the stars, but Maria had no food, no shelter, an infection was setting in. "I thought, if someone found us, they'd end it quick," she confessed, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. "Better than watching her starve." Elias listened, his weathered face etched with empathy. He was no stranger to loss. His own daughter had died young in a riding accident, leaving him and Clara shattered. The ranch had become his solace, a place of quiet selflessness where he helped neighbors with fences or shared his harvest without fanfare. But this was different, this was a test of his humanity. As night fell, he sat by the fire, watching Maria sleep fitfully with Hope in her arms. An unexpected turn came in the form of doubt. Why him? It was just a lonely rancher, scraping by on cattle sales and memories. Yet, in that moment, a profound realization dawned. Kindness wasn't about grand gestures, it was about showing up when the world turned its back. The next morning brought the first twist. Elias drove into town, a bumpy hour-long trip, to fetch supplies, formula, antibiotics from the vet, the doctor was too far, and clothes from the thrift store. But as he returned, he found Maria feverish, the infection worsening. Hope cried weakly, her tiny body fighting for life. Panic gripped him. He called his old friend, Doc Harlan, a retired physician who lived on the neighboring spread. "Elias, this ain't my expertise anymore," Doc grumbled over the phone, but he came anyway, arriving in his rusty pickup with a medical bag older than Elias himself. Examining Maria, Doc's face grew grave. "She's septic. Needs a hospital, now." The nearest one was in Billings, 2 hours away, and a storm was brewing on the horizon. Here, the story took an unexpected turn. Elias, who had always prided himself on self-reliance, realized he couldn't do this alone. He reached out to the community, the very people he'd quietly helped over the years. He called the widow down the road who'd lost her husband to the same cancer that took Clara. She brought homemade broth and blankets. The young couple from the next ranch over, struggling with their own farm debts, arrived with dappers and a cradle they'd outgrown. Even the gruff sheriff, who Elias had once bailed out of a snowdrift, showed up with a radio to coordinate help. Word spread like wildfire across the plains, and soon, a convoy formed to get Maria and Hope to the hospital. But the storm hit hard, winds howling, rain turning roads to mud. Elias's truck slid off the path, stuck in a ditch, with Maria moaning in pain and Hope's cries piercing the chaos. In that moment of crisis, Elias faced his profound realization: selflessness wasn't just giving, it was receiving, too. He had isolated himself after Clara's death, thinking strength meant solitude. But as neighbors arrived with chains and tractors to pull them free, he saw the web of humanity he'd woven unknowingly. "We're in this together," Eli, the widow said, squeezing his hand. They made it to the hospital just in time. Doctors rushed Maria into surgery, stabilizing her infection, while nurses whisked Hope to the NICU, where she began to thrive on proper care. The emotional climax unfolded in the sterile hospital room days later. Maria, bandaged but alive, howled Hope, now pink-cheeked and alert. Elias sat beside them, exhausted but transformed. "I was ready to die," Maria whispered. "But you opened that blanket and saw us. Not as burdens, but as people worth saving." Tears welled in Elias's eyes. In an act of profound compassion, he offered more than shelter. He sold a portion of his land, the very acres he'd sworn to keep for his daughter's memory, to pay for Maria's recovery and a fresh start. It was a sacrifice that stung, but in giving it, he found freedom from his grief. "Kindness isn't a debt," he told her. "It's the thread that binds us all." Months passed, and the ranch bloomed anew. Maria stayed on, helping with chores as she healed, her strength returning like spring rain. Hope grew chubby and curious, toddling through the grass under Elias's watchful eye. The community rallied, building a small cottage on the remaining land for Maria, turning Elias's act into a ripple of generosity. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Maria turned to him. "You stumbled back in horror that day, but you stepped forward in love." Elias smiled, his heart full. "We all have horrors in our blankets: pain, loss, fear. But when we open them to each other, that's where the light gets in." In the end, their story whispered across Montana and beyond, a testament to the power of humanity. It reminded everyone, from bustling cities to quiet ranches, that in a world quick to judge and slow to help, a single act of selflessness could rewrite destinies. Kindness wasn't weakness, it was the ultimate strength, binding strangers into family, turning despair into hope. And in that hope, they found not just survival, but a life worth living, vibrant, connected, and eternally inspiring.